And essentially the too long didn't read version of Lindsay Ellis quitting YouTube is really the story of a content creator who ultimately was simply not woke enough for their own audience.
People are calling Lindsay Ellis racist. People are saying that Lindsay Ellis is anti-Asian.
Lindsay Ellis leaving YouTube and quitting content is all your fault.
That is the cautionary tale that is in fact a Lindsay Ellis.
What have I done to you?
In March 2021, a tweet was sent out into the ether that would change everything for Lindsay Ellis, a generally well-respected content creator and author. Allegations of racism and bigotry, as well as tremendous amounts of verbal abuse was levied against her for the tweets, which resulted in her deleting her Twitter account and stepping away from YouTube. Years on from this incident, and a lot of people have looked back on it retrospectively and questioned how this could have happened in the first place. In a lot of people's eyes, this is one of the most puzzling cancellations in recent history. A misunderstanding of a statement about an otherwise forgettable Disney production caused chaos the likes of which we rarely see on the internet. In this video, we're going to delve into this incident, as well as the background behind it, discuss the politically charged fallout from it, and reflect on how this series of events impacted Lindsay Ellis's social media presence. So with that said, let's kick things off with some background. Before we get into this cancellation, it only makes sense that I tell you a bit about Lindsay Ellis so you can get a small flavour for who she is. Born in 1984, perhaps the best place to start is in 2008, when Doug Walker, otherwise known as the Nostalgia Critic, released a video titled The Search for Nostalgia Chick, in which he announced that he was looking for someone to help him review shows that he didn't have much knowledge on because he was a man.
So, I need someone who doesn't have testicles to review these shows, more specifically, a female. That is why I am starting a worldwide search for the Nostalgia Chick.
Eventually, the role goes to Lindsay, and so starting in the latter half of 2008, she gets her start as the Nostalgia Chick, giving reviews alongside Doug Walker. In retrospect, though this was her start, this is not an era that Lindsay was too fond of. Based upon sources that I could find online, there were plenty of reasons for this. It seems that when these videos were being made, she was extremely unhappy, and eventually it reached a breaking point. These days, her Nostalgia Chick reviews are deleted, as well as her posts about leaving Channel Awesome. Nonetheless, within her video 400k Q&A, she references that she wasn't proud of anything that she did before 2015.
Are there any essays you'd like to redo/update? All of them? Basically anything I did before I departed the channel that shall not be named. Except for the Freddy Got Fingered review, that one I'm still pretty proud of.
Out of respect for Ellis, and also because there are already about 1,000-hour-long comprehensive videos that detail the skeletons in Channel Awesome's closet in the late 2000s and early 2010s, I'm not going to harp on about her time there. It's part of her history and its background for this story, but it's not exactly what this video is about. All I'll say on the matter is that today she's done a lot to distance herself from being known as the Nostalgia Chick. She's taken down all of her reviews, her Vintage Ches Lindsay channel where these videos were posted is now barren, and she explained on Twitter that the only reason why they were ever up in the first place was that so these videos couldn't be pirated and that people couldn't just monetize her work. But now they were picking up traction, it was best to take them down. As we've already discussed, she stated that she wasn't proud of the content that she was making at the time. Another way that she distanced herself though was by uploading independently onto her own channel. And throughout 2015 as well as 2016, she launches her Loose Cannon series on her own personal channel, as well as a few video essays that aren't tied into series. And this is really where she begins to take off views-wise. Come 2018, and you'd be hard-pressed to find a video by her that didn't reach at least 1 million views. They were few and far between. What Lindsay had to say resonated with her audience, and throughout the years she was able to build a very large, very loyal fan base, today sitting at 1.21 million subscribers, despite not even having uploaded a proper video in 2.5 years. According to her social blade, she hasn't actually lost any subscribers in this time. If anything, she's gained them. She's also to this very day one of the most followed creators on Patreon. By 2020, she released a science fiction novel called Axiom's End, which was not only positively received, but was also a New York Times bestseller. This would be followed up in late 2021 with a sequel named Truth of the Divine, and I should also mention that apparently a third book in the Axiom's End series is meant to be released within days of this video going up. This was something I found out during the research for this video. It wasn't planned. But that's all getting ahead of ourselves. For now, I think the best place to start is back 3 years ago, when Lindsay would send out a tweet that would send Twitter into a frenzy and produce some of the most bewildering outrage ever unleashed on the internet. In March 2021, she posted, and I quote, "Also watched Raya and the Last Dragon, and I think we need to come up with a name for this genre that is basically Avatar the Last Airbender reduxes. It's like half of all YA fantasy published in the last few years. This time, Zuko's a girl." Yes, that is the tweet. This tweet might seem innocent enough. I'm sure that when Ellis posted this, she didn't have a single thought in her mind that this would be the catalyst that would literally shift the trajectory of her life. But what would happen next would result in one of the most insane cancellations in content creator history. Because yes, she did in fact get cancelled for this tweet. It might elude you as to why this particular tweet was so controversial, but if there's one thing that you need to know about Twitter and its terminally online goons, is that they don't really need a reason to come after you. They'll do it anyway, even if it's for a harmless tweet like this. Now, just to give you a little bit of context, the reason people felt the need to cancel her for this tweet is because they felt as though she was being racist for calling all properties based on Asian culture the same. Avatar The Last Airbender, a phenomenal show and story that dates back to 2005, is identifiably inspired by various cultures, primarily in East Asia, which we'll jump back to later on. Raya and the Last Dragon is also inspired by various different cultures, primarily in South Asia. So in the minds of the Twitter critics, lumping in these properties and pointing out their similarities was to say that all Asian-inspired media is the same. To give you some historical context, if you remember back to early 2021, Asian hate was on the rise, with the Atlanta shootings and a 339% increase in anti-Asian crime in the USA compared to the year before being the largest examples of this. As a result, the Stop Asian Hate movement was formed beginning in March 2021, and very shortly after, this tweet was dropped. If circumstances were different and Raya was released in 2022 instead, I would wager that this never would have happened. This historical context is important too, because it's something that Lindsay herself brings up within her response video, which we'll get to in just a moment.
By the time I woke up, it had already blown way past "this is a careless display of white privilege" to "this sort of thing is a contributing factor to the mass murder of Asian women that just happened."
I want to jump ahead for a moment to about a month after the tweet was sent, because that's when Lindsay would finally respond within a video titled "Mask Off." This 100-minute video currently sits at 3 million views and has seemingly been unlisted for at least a year, with the user on the Lindsay Ellis subreddit not being able to find the video about a year ago. While I'd usually implore you to watch the original video first, in this instance, because it's unlisted, I'm not going to do that, because apparently Lindsay has some regrets about posting this in the first place, saying that if she could do this again, she would have become the robot that ignores everything and apologizes for things. This cancellation legitimately seems to have broken her spirit, and this is likely why the video is now unlisted. Usually I'd leave this video till later because it happened chronologically after the entire thing on Twitter went down and she deleted her account. But because Lindsay's response is just so comprehensive, I think it would be useful to have in tandem with me explaining this tweet's reception and backlash. To give you a very basic TLDR of it though, she begins the video by discussing the infamous Justine Sacco tweet, which is commonly referred to as Twitter's very first large-scale cancellation. She continues by discussing how Twitter constantly has a villain of the day, which is essentially when someone will say something out of pocket and then get dogpiled immediately. And eventually, it happened to her because of this tweet.
On Friday, March 26th, 2021, I was Twitter's villain of the day.
The tweet started gaining hate when she was asleep. When she woke up, she started to try and defend her position, which she admits was a mistake, because there's nothing that Twitter likes more than when their target is trying to defend themselves.
If anyone who spent any time on Twitter can tell you, getting defensive and doubling down is about the last thing anyone should do, so that was an oopsie.
And during this, Lindsay would tweet out a message that only made the situation worse. She said, "I can see where if you squint, I was implying all Asian-inspired properties are the same, especially if you were already privy to those conversations where I had not seen them. But the basic framework of The Last Airbender is becoming popular in fantasy fiction outside of Asian-inspired stuff." If you don't know why this tweet was controversial, take a wild guess. It wasn't exactly because she was doubling down, but instead because she used the phrase, "if you squint," within this context meaning if you look closely. Some people though seem to theorize that this was actually Lindsay being racist because of the racial connotation that comes when you put Asian and squint in the same sentence. This is what Ellis had to say about it.
And I tried to give, some credence to the valid criticism by saying like, if you squint, I can kind of see what you're saying, and God damn it. It was early. You shouldn't tweet in the morning. No, you shouldn't tweet at all.
I mean, this really sealed her fate. This was a blunder of epic proportions. From her perspective, this was an honest mistake. From the perspective of those attacking her, this was an unsubtle racist jab. Now, in her response video, she makes a point saying that most of the irrational anger that she received was not actually from South Asians, whose culture was at the center of this, but apparently it was instead from white people who I guess felt the
Okay. Hoomst.
It was after this when things somehow escalated even further. This was because people decided to go into Ellis's past to try and dig up dirt on her to prove that she was a racist and a bad person. A thread would be made spanning more than a decade of things that Lindsay had done and said in the past that could be deemed cancelable. Some of these things Ellis would own up to and agree with, others she claimed were made in bad faith and were a misrepresentation of what she was saying or what she meant. These were allegations that had been contorted into another meaning to try and cancel her, and she claimed that some of these examples you could only realistically agree with if you had already drawn the conclusion that Ellis was being vindictively racist, because in isolation they were essentially pointless. Once more, because it's not entirely necessary to get into the specifics of what was in this thread, I'm just not going to. I'm not going to list off every single thing that Ellis has done in the past decade and a half that stirred up controversy, but there were about a dozen or so examples. At the time, it probably did turn a lot of people against her, seeing all of this compiled evidence, if you want to call it that, without the context behind it. As has already been mentioned, she does admit to fault and wrongdoing in several of these, and while perhaps her mistakes along the way were a bit punchier than most people commit, for anyone to have been on the internet for as long as she has, at one point or another they're going to say something that they later disagree with, or make a sketch that has a joke that's a bit over the line. From a personal standpoint, there are stances that I held or points that I made within videos uploaded less than 2 years ago that I no longer agree with. People make mistakes. To err is human. That said, within her response video, she goes on to explain what she meant by the tweet. So if anyone hasn't seen Raya and the Last Dragon, it was a 2021 Disney film that centered around a girl named Raya who was in search of a dragon named Sisu. It was foretold that Sisu had the power to save the world and its various warring kingdoms named the Fang, Heart, Spine, Talon, and Tail from evil spirits. If you take a look at the film, it's fairly obvious that it's inspired by South Asian cultures. It had 2 screenwriters of Asian heritage, its main cast was almost exclusively made up of people of Asian heritage, there are various articles about how they wanted to avoid Asian stereotypes, the crew travelled to South Asia during production, the 5 kingdoms were designed around various climates within South Asia, and as with a lot of modern Disney movies, the setting is culturally significant to the story. I found a Screen Rant article that claimed that the Fang had inspiration from Cambodia, the Spine from Vietnam, Talon's markets were meant to feel like markets in Laos, Thailand, and Indonesia, and Tail has inspiration found in the Mekong River that runs through many Southeast Asian countries. In comparison to The Last Airbender, I found this article written by the Stanford Daily, which reads that there are parallels between the Fire Nation and Imperial Japan, as well as the Water Nation and Inuit culture, the air nomads to Buddhist monks, and of course the Earth Kingdom to monarchical China. These are of course all different sources of cultural inspiration, but as Ellis explains, this was not how she was comparing the 2 properties. Perhaps the best argument in her defense is something that she includes after. She mentions that Zuko in this instance was a girl. In case you haven't seen The Last Airbender but you want to, I'm about to give some slight spoilers on Zuko's character, so if you're planning to watch it one day, make sure to skip to the timestamp on the screen. If you don't care though, Zuko is a morally flawed character and an anti-hero who grows from the main adversary in season 1, wanting to capture the Avatar to win back the favour of his father, to an ally come season 3 who recognises the errors of his ways. What Ellis was saying was that both of these stories start off with peace before one nation decides to grab power, resulting in worldwide misery, and then they have the titular character who's known as the last of their kind, who's been prophesied to be able to save the day using their powers, but for some reason they've been locked away before being discovered, and soon after it's revealed that they aren't as experienced as the prophecy foretold, and so over the course of the narrative they need to quickly learn how to use and access their powers, travelling to various nations to learn skills and lessons. They both have various warring nations inspired by Asian culture, and they both have a character who is led astray by their parent, who happens to be the leader of the aggressive nation and made it their mission to hunt down the heroes in order to win the favour of their warlord parent before questioning themselves and eventually redeeming themselves. What I interpret Lindsay as saying, and maybe this will get me cancelled too, is that there are some clear similarities between the 2 properties. The skeletons of both stories are quite similar, and they both have characters who share the same purpose in the plot, whose arcs mirror each other. For her only comment about Raya and the Last Dragon to be that it's similar to Avatar: The Last Airbender because they're both inspired by Asian culture and folklore, rather than they're both similar because they share similar story elements and have similar characters that play out similar roles, to me sounds a bit far-fetched, and to me it reeks of media illiteracy. Ellis over the years has proven time and time again that she's generally very good at critiquing and analysing film. And if you don't believe me, believe her political opponents, who despite the fact they disagree with a lot of what she has to say, do surrender the fact that Lindsay Ellis is a very intelligent woman.
But I do want to just say up front that Lindsay Ellis, unlike many other progressives, unlike many other versions of these content creators, is actually talented. It's actually unfortunate that somebody with some ability, somebody who has some analytical skill, has subjected herself to these kind of people in her audience.
It's what she's been doing for a decade and a half at least. So it boggles my mind how anyone could read her tweet and then just assume the worst possible interpretation it possibly could and not really read between the lines of it. They truly believe that a racist generalization was the only thing that she could see from this movie. The only thing they could read from her take was that she just lumped it in with other properties because they were both inspired by different Asian culture and folklore. And not only that, but she never distinctly said that its similarities to Avatar were ever a bad thing. Of course, her saying that Raya feels like a redux of Avatar sounds like she's saying that it's unoriginal, and the tweet does come off as sounding slightly tired of it, but then again, Avatar is rad, and there's nothing wrong with using it as an influence. Every movie made today is going to have its influences. It's going to have a wide range of them. It's unavoidable. And it's not inherently a bad thing if a movie has a range of influences, meshing them together to create something unique. Later in her response video, Lindsay brings up a very good point, which is that Screen Junkies made the exact same comparison days before and received no backlash whatsoever.
Ryatar, the last air dragon, Avatar, Raya and the last dragon.
And look at that dislike ratio. I don't think there is a single video on my entire channel with a dislike ratio that low. I wonder why they didn't get any backlash.
This comparison isn't a hard, abstract one to make, and it wasn't just Lindsay who forged this connection. Some people, Ellis included, have said that the reason that she got it so bad is that she's a female critic and video essayist on the internet, and therefore was held to different standards compared to men. And based on the fact that after Ellis deleted her Twitter account, people then went after her associates who were also female, it's not exactly hard to see why. Especially if Screen Junkies was met with zero backlash, despite making the exact same comparison. Keep in mind that at this point in time, Ellis had only made a basic observation about Raya and the Last Dragon, and now people were sending threatening tweets to her associates. People who didn't even make the tweets. That's the level of crazy and delusion we're seeing here. In the fallout of this cancellation, a lot of people were quite quick to point fingers and laugh at Lindsay, as well as her haters, through the lens of political irony. Content creators such as Lauren Chen and Short Fat Otaku, real name, decided to make videos on the incident. For all intents and purposes, I don't know Lindsay Ellis's political stances on everything, but she's outwardly very left-leaning, and some people might even go as far as to describe her as woke. In years previous to this incident, she had been out on Twitter making posts that many people on the right would call ironic, given that now she was on the other end of things.
Lindsay Ellis, who by the way participated in the dogpiling on J.K. Rowling, so irony amongst ironies.
My empathy for Lindsay Ellis is severely limited because what is happening to her, not only did her audience do to other people, and not only did she cultivate that audience with that attitude, but she has done it to people herself. She did it to Rose of Dawn. She did it to Tom Scott. She certainly helped do it to Doug Walker and everyone over at that guy with the glasses.
The people who were calling her out on Twitter would also be considered as woke. For the most part, these would have been people who found themselves on the left of the political aisle, who were now trying to cancel one of the internet's most passionate left-wing creators. The irony of the situation was owned up to by Lindsay herself, because she said that though she was the villain of the day in March, she had been on the other side of things in the past. She had been guilty in the past of dunking on people, scoring points, and getting satisfaction in taking someone down a peg. The irony behind this was that from the point of view of anti-PC and anti-woke critics, it was the very same people who would have previously kicked up a stink on Twitter about other people not being PC or saying something they deemed insensitive or ignorant that were now doing it to one of their own. They claimed that Lindsay over the years had built up an audience of vicious attack dogs that would salivate over the chance to call people bigoted or offensive, but then eventually turned on their master.
I, for one, do not feel bad for Ellis because, quite frankly, this culture and this ideology is something that she herself has participated in for far too long. I don't mean to sound rude, but honestly, if Lindsay Ellis doesn't like people calling her racist for no good reason, maybe she should not participate in that same behavior.
People on the right had an absolute field day, especially on YouTube. And why wouldn't they? If the shoe was on the other foot, and the right cannibalized one of their own for such petty reasons, you already know that it would go down the exact same way.
Don't align yourself with these progressive whack jobs because they will ultimately end up destroying you. That is the cautionary tale that is in fact a Lindsay Ellis.
I don't understand how someone as, honestly, intelligent and usually thoughtful as Lindsay Ellis is not seeing this. It is not normal for your own audience to be jumping down your throat for innocuous tweets that really harm nobody.
Lindsay, you brought this on yourself. You weren't a good person. Progressive leftist politics do not create good people. You cultivated an audience of bitter failures who took it out on you because you were not a bitter failure.
Eventually, this all got too much for Lindsay, and she would delete her Twitter account. Ellis would essentially leave social media after this. She initially deleted her Twitter account, but was then told that she had to promote her books, so eventually came back. Today, she seems to only use it to promote her work, with Elisa Hansen running her account, not Lindsay herself. Months after the incident, she would also leave YouTube. Her response video was posted on the 15th of April, after which she made 4 more videos before leaving her channel altogether. There were apparently several reasons behind this decision, the riot incident obviously being one of them, but also the constant abuse that she had faced for years, and the fact that she apparently wanted to focus on writing for some time. As has already been mentioned, Axiom's End was very well received, so it made sense. But also, by this point, Ellis was apparently just fatigued, bled dry of ideas, and it happens after such a long time in video making. I'm sure that throughout the years, whether it be unjust demonetizations or copyright issues, these things would have taken their toll on Ellis. A good fix for a lot of these issues was to move over to Nebula, which she eventually did. Ellis is now making higher quality, more infrequent productions, with her dropping 6 big videos to Nebula ever since leaving YouTube. Her latest being a feature-length John and Yoko upload releasing back in December 2023. She's been inactive on Nebula since, and I take a guess that it's because of something I've already mentioned, that being that her new book's release date is fastly approaching. I'd assume that she's been working away at that. Also, she's had a second child earlier this year, so balancing writing with the responsibility of being a parent to 2 young children means that uploads are few and far between. Nonetheless, these are new chapters and beginnings for Ellis after such a disastrous 2021. It's clear that Ellis has a lot of regrets about various aspects of her career. 3 years later, and the bizarre abuse that she received seems even more strange now because Raya and the Last Dragon was pretty mid. The movie was a bit of a box office flop, and this might be anecdotal, but outside of this incident, have you ever met a passionate Raya and the Last Dragon fan? It's been 3 years, this is one of Disney's latest big animated films, but not too long down the road, and it seems to be largely forgotten compared to the likes of Encanto, or even Wish, which was hated, but at least it was spoken about. On the internet at least, I think this drama is more remembered than the movie. To this very day, the Raya and the Last Dragon tweets, as well as the subsequent dogpiling of Lindsay Ellis, stands as one of the most insane cancellations of all time, and likely will be for some time to come. A bizarre series of events that ended in fury, abuse, mockery, and a life that was changed forever. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already yet. I would truly appreciate it. If there's another strange cancellation you know about and you'd like me to make a video on it, then how about you let me know down in the comments and maybe we could make this into a bit of a series. If there's enough demand for it, I could definitely look into these retrospective cancellations because to me it is a very interesting concept. If you want to check something else out from my channel, then why not take a look at my video about the downfall and redemption arc of Mizzy, the infamous TikTok prankster, next. It's a great video in my opinion, one that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Go check it out. Aside from that, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Yours sincerely, Fox.